Okay, you all heard this is being recorded. Welcome everyone to this Sustainable CT webinar on strategic energy management. I am Lynn Stoddard, the Executive Director of Sustainable CT, and got at least one of my teammates here. Torin, you want to say hello?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry, Torin Radiccioni here from Sustainable CT. It's a pleasure to see you all today.
Great. So if folks wouldn't mind renaming themselves, if you know how to do that, so we can see both your name and what town you're from, that'll help as we have conversation and questions in the chat. I'm excited about this. This is a free resource that we're actually all paying for on our monthly electricity bills every month. That's being used by Energize CT to support towns with energy management and managed by our friends and partners at Eversource and Avangrid. So today we're excited to explore the topic of strategic energy management. As those of you familiar with Sustainable CT know that Category 7 is all of our energy actions, and they're basically about tracking data and figuring out ways to increase energy efficiency and renewables use. So that's a super important part of energy management and Sustainable CT certification. It's also a part of our climate leaders designation because we can demonstrate greenhouse gas impacts from this work, as well as cost savings, comfort for people using the buildings, and so on. So it's really important category of actions. As part of our climate leaders learning sessions, we do have a few other webinars that are coming up. I'm just going to put up a slide really quickly. So here are some upcoming events in climate leaders. In February, we'll be focusing on becoming a bicycle-friendly community. So reductions from transportation emissions. And then we're exploring these other topics, dates TBD. So be sure you look at our website to find out about those. The Solar Smart program, which is streamlining solar permitting, the heat vulnerability index that our Circa partners have developed, and EV chargers, electric vehicle chargers in your town. So with that, we're going to our partners, Dana Mowry and Shay Kerwin. Dana's with Eversource and Shay's with Avangrid. Both, if you are in either one of these districts for Avangrid or Eversource. So both of those programs have strategic energy management. We'll talk about if there are any differences. I'll let them say a few words. Then Michael Koch from Cascade Energy, who's the vendor for supplying this service to Eversource towns, will give us a presentation on what strategic energy management is. We're really excited and grateful to have a guest from Vermont, Kate Stevenson from the Montpelier Energy Advisory Committee, to talk about how her town actually used these services to improve energy management and save money and improve greenhouse gas emissions. So thanks, Kate, for taking time to come with us and join us in Connecticut. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dana.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Dana Mowry with Eversource. I'm not going to steal any of Mike's thunder by kind of explaining the SEM program, except to say that it is one of a number of programs that Eversource and UI, and again, not stealing Shay's thunder either, that we offer in terms of energy management, energy efficiency, studies to see what is possible to do for municipalities. We also offer, we also cover commercial, industrial buildings as well. Today we'll focus mostly on municipalities. That is clearly our audience here. I am one of 3 people, energy efficiency consultants within Eversource that handles specifically municipalities. So there are just a ton of resources, and I'm happy to share contact information with anybody if anybody is interested in learning about the additional programs. So, and then I guess I will let Shay introduce herself as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shay Kerwin. I'm the Strategic Energy Management Program Manager for UI. So if you have any questions during or after this meeting, you can definitely contact me and I'd love to connect more.
So thanks, Dana and Shay. Actually, I know Michael, I think, has your information in the slides, but if you would each just put your email in the chat so people can have it right now. It's always good to know a friendly face at Eversource and Avangrid. So thanks for joining us. All right, Michael, all you.
All right, I'm gonna get my screen shared. Let's see, is that up and good for folks? All right.
It's good.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks for the introduction. So today we're here to talk about specifically strategic energy management. Thanks to Sustainable Connecticut and Eversource and Avangrid for supporting this. And so before I dive in, I want to kind of give a quick explanation of what we're talking about today. So strategic energy management, as Dana and Shay mentioned, is a program that's funded by the utilities. And the key word here that I want to highlight is that SEM is a program. And this is distinct from, say, like a project or something that falls in a timeline that's very distinct. So when we think of projects, we're thinking of things like LED lighting, solar installs, maybe it's a specific energy efficiency project. And those projects are part of SEM, part of strategic energy management. But what I'm going to be talking today is really about setting up a program at your municipality. So I'd like to start with that just to make sure that folks understand that there's really a difference between what you might typically think of with energy efficiency or renewables or things like that are like kind of discrete projects. Really what we're talking about today is a holistic approach to managing your energy over the long term. So the agenda for today, we've gone through introductions. I'll talk a bit about what SEM is, how it correlates with the sustainable CT certifications. We have Kate on the line who has gone through a similar program and is going to share out some of her experience, and then we'll talk about next steps. So a little bit of background on myself. So first, everyone, thanks for joining this Wednesday. My name is Michael Koch. I'm a mechanical engineer by training and focused roughly the first half of my career on developing energy efficiency projects. So we're kind of back to that project word across a host of subsystems, HVAC, compressed air, boilers, you name it. I did a lot of that engineering analysis to help develop those projects. Over the second half of my career, so roughly like the last 6 or 7 years, I've been really focused on working with organizations like your all's to set up these energy management programs and help run those like we're going to discuss today. So I'm really excited to be here today and chat more about this topic. It's something that I care deeply about. I think it's a really great resource, and hopefully by the end it's something that you see value into. So many organizations, including municipalities, are setting targets for how much they're going to reduce their energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, how they're going to work towards decarbonization. Sometimes these are annual goals, but many organizations are now looking further down the road to 2030 to 2050 and aiming to be carbon neutral in that time frame. So for me to better understand where you all are coming from, I'd like to run a quick poll that asks some questions related to this. So, and we'll have a few polls today that kind of help me tailor this discussion. So Torrin, can we pull up that first poll? And there's a few options here, but the poll goes regarding energy and greenhouse gas reduction goals. My city has not discussed setting a goal, discussed setting a goal but not picked a target, set an annual reduction but are not sure if we'll meet it, set annual targets and we'll meet them, and then more or less the same thing for 2030 and 2050 targets. And then the last one is unsure and would need to gather more info. So it looks like we have some answers coming in. We have 10 answers. And when we end this, will this share with everyone, Torin?
I believe so.
Okay. Are folks seeing the answers as they submit? Or the results, I should say?
I believe not until I end up ending the poll and I share the results, I believe.
Awesome. Thanks for running it, Torin.
Oh,
Greatly
no
helpful.
no problem, Michael.
All right, it looks like we have 11 of 19, and I'm guessing a number of those folks are not tied to a city. So I think we can probably end the poll. All right, so let's look at the results. So it looks about like 36% have not discussed setting a goal. About half, or getting close to half, have 2030 and 2050 targets. A few without a path to reaching that. Some have that in place and are looking like they're going to meet it. So probably a good mix of entities that have set a goal and feel like they're on the path, or they're at least in discussion. So that's really helpful information for me. I mean, it shows that this is, especially the 2030 and 2050 targets for being carbon neutral are popping up a lot more. I feel like in the last year, municipalities, corporations, all sorts of entities are really starting to commit to these, but clearly it's one thing to commit to it and say, okay, we're going to be carbon neutral in 2050. How you reach that in the next 27 years is a whole different kind of ball game. And what we're going to talk about today with strategic energy management is really a framework that helps municipalities and other organizations work towards that in a systematic way, because you're not going to get it done with one project, right? It's a large effort with a lot of people over decades, so we have to be really intentional about how we go about this. And as we go through this, please feel free to jump in the chat with any questions. I think we have a small enough group that even if you want to unmute and just pipe in, I would say feel free to do that. So before I dive into what specifically SEM is, I just wanted to reference the Sustainable CT certification first. I think this is something that the cities on this call are going to be familiar with. And so I just wanted to kind of tie it into what we're talking about today. So what I put up here is I have the different actions from section 7 that Lynn mentioned earlier that are focused on energy. I'll reference this on the next slide as I tie this into what SEM is, but I just want to bring this up as one of our goals with strategic energy management and collaborating with Sustainable CT is to help cities like your alls either work towards this certification or improve on whatever your existing scores are. So as we'll see, SEM is very flexible. We're here to support you all in achieving your goals. And if the sustainable certification is part of that, we'd want to integrate that into our discussions. So section 7 alone, and Lynn, I might want you to make sure that I'm saying this correctly, but from what I saw, there's a minimum of about 70 points, and it can go all the way up to 600 points if it's maxed out. Is that fair?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I haven't added them all up, but yes, lots of points.
Yeah, and so, I mean, maxing it out would clearly be pretty challenging. But for that certification, there's quite a few points possible for energy alone. And I'll tie that all into shortly how SEM supports that. So I had another quick poll I wanted to give, and I say quick, and I'm realizing this one might not be as quick. But I wanted to get an idea of where folks stand on this certification. But yeah, this is the short one. So the question is, or the statement is, I'm familiar with these actions for the Sustainable CT certification. Yes, somewhat, or not at all. All right, so We got a few more answers coming in. All right, I think we can end that poll. So it looks like pretty close to an even split. You know, some people are totally familiar, some somewhat familiar, and then a handful not at all. So, you know, I guess some brief background then. The certification, Lynn, and feel free to jump in for the folks that say not at all familiar. But section 7 is focused on energy, how you can be more sustainable about energy. And the idea is that if we work towards these things, you get more points towards your certification, and it demonstrates that your city, your municipality, your town is doing well in this area. Is that, I think that's probably.
Yeah, I'll just add, if you're familiar with our program, this is category 7, the energy actions. A town needs to do at least one action in each category to earn certification at any level, bronze, silver, or gold. So you would need to do something in energy, and there are lots of resources, again, from our partnership with the utilities to help you benchmark and track your energy for free, or take advantage of the SEM program and so on. SEM is going to help get you towards points with many of these actions.
Yeah, and this all ties in with the climate leader designation as well, which I believe 140 points from the energy category is needed for that designation. Is that right, Lynn?
Some of the actions are in other categories like transportation, because there are greenhouse gas emissions there, or open space preservation, but many of them are in the energy category.
Great. Yeah, and so the focus of strategic energy management is mainly on electricity and gas. It is funded by the utility, so we're not necessarily diving a lot into like transportation or other fuels per se. It is something we could discuss, but you know, it's not the primary focus. All right, so let's talk a bit about what is strategic energy management. So at a high level, there are a few key things that we aim to collaborate with you all on as part of an SEM program. So the first is activating an energy team. So this can come in many forms, but this is a group of folks, typically, you know, maybe it's been called an energy committee, sustainability committee. It has lots of different names, a green team. But for the energy team, you know, we're mainly getting folks together. And one of the key focus is getting those, well, first finding and then completing energy saving projects. So we're back to that, you know, that word projects. We're talking about things like lighting upgrades, set point changes, kind of a host of different things that are going to help you, help your city reduce your energy consumption, reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe that's decarbonization or electrification. You know, there's kind of a lot of things that fall into that project category. And we want to be working together with you all to help, you know, to help find those and help work those through the pipeline, help put in processes to ensure those projects are getting done in a timely manner. And the resources that we bring, which I'll talk more about in an additional slide, but we can help bring engineering resources there as well as organizational coaching. And I've included these boxes that try to tie it to the certification. I know it's busy because it's all just the numbers, but that first one, how it ties to the sustainable CT certification is it will help support these different items on the list. So things like reducing your energy use across the buildings, achieving high performance, high energy performance for individual buildings. It can help increase use of renewable energy and so on. So that's the first one. That's really focused on completing the energy projects. The second one here, tracking energy performance across all buildings, is really a key part of SEM, because once we've done these energy projects, we need to have a way to have some sort of feedback that what we're doing is actually getting the results that we want. And so what we're looking to do is pull energy data directly from the utility to understand, okay, what were they using in the past? Now that we've made these changes, how is that building performing now? And that can be done in a number of different ways. What we're more or less doing is creating some sort of model or running engineering calcs to understand how we've improved that performance. Some of you all might be familiar with Energy Star Portfolio Manager. That's kind of that is a form of what we're talking about here, and something that we would look to leverage potentially with other resources that are available. There's some really great resources through Yukon. I imagine some of you have worked with Amy Thompson over there, and it seems like they do a great job. So that's kind of generally what we're talking about here. But what we want to do is at the end of the day is know, okay, we made a change. How did it actually affect our energy consumption? So we would be supporting that with, with pulling data and understanding those buildings. And then the final one is around engagement. So when we talk about SEM, we're talking about really a holistic program that's going to help your city drive down energy use over the long term. And when we're starting out, it's usually like a small group of folks, right? Maybe you have the facilities people on board because clearly they have a lot of influence over the large energy. You have some community folks, folks from the city council. It kind of depends on what your structure is. But we want to look at how do we broaden that engagement? How do we get staff involved in saving energy? How do we get the community involved potentially? That can take a lot of different routes, but we want to make sure that everyone is involved. And what I like to say, turning off the proverbial light switch, right? We want everyone to have that mindset that they have some influence, no matter how big or little it is, that they're part of this and that they can make a difference. And I'll bring up some of the other, how this ties in with the sustainable CT certification. So all parts of this more or less tie back to, parts of what sustainable CT is trying to promote with municipalities. And there's also a couple others, 8.1 and 8.7, that related to like holding a sustainability event. That's something within SEM that we would most definitely be looking to do. And then 8.7 is around engaging with youth in the community. So those are all kind of potentially things that we would want to implement as part of SEM, beyond like the more technical stuff like the energy projects and tracking energy performance. Any questions so far? I know I've been talking for a minute, so.
Michael,
All
I
right.
believe Charlie has the question.
Oh yeah, Charlie, go for it.
If somebody wants to start this process now, but the community has actually de facto done things in the past, in starting it now, can you go back historically, or are you building your baseline from the present?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the answer is both. There's typically some program requirements. So for like Eversource, we're looking at a baseline of the year prior. And that's because we want to see, okay, what did the SEM program, what was its specific influence? But SEM is flexible. And so what I mean by that is if you're already like down this road, if you already say have an energy team in place and you've done some projects, which I guarantee most cities have done some projects, people are talking about this. Maybe you're tracking your energy use already in Portfolio Manager. We can meet you wherever you're at and build off of that. So, from our point of view, it's ideal when a municipality or an organization has already kind of gone down this path, because then we're not starting from scratch. There already is some base knowledge. So in terms of like specifically the baselining question, I think we would consider both, right? There's one that's important for the program, for the utility, but it's also like what's relevant to the city. And you might have a goal already that's like, okay, we want to save 5% compared to a 2012 baseline or something. Like we would want to integrate both. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, the point isn't for us to come in and say, this is how you do SEM. The first thing we're going to ask is, okay, what are you doing already? Because then we can, you know, hit the ground running potentially.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Any other questions? All right, so now I want to dive in a little bit to what specifically the your municipality would receive if you enrolled in the program. And I want to reiterate that this program is at no cost to municipalities. It's fully funded by the utilities in Connecticut. And so what that funding is really providing is paying for our consulting time, right? You know, the ask of that we'll have of you all is of your time, but you're not necessarily going to get, you're not going to get a bill from us or from the utility for any of this. So I just want to kind of put that out there in the beginning, because it is, you know, when we think of capital projects, those often might have like a cost share component or something like that. So so there are a few key things that I want to talk through here about what actually is involved in the SEM program, and I'll have a kind of a rough time commitment on a next slide. So the first one is workshops. So we have trainings that cover both organizational and technical topics. These cover things such as like how to set up your energy team, who to include on that, how to write an energy policy, how do we identify energy waste? So this is more of a technical topic. How do we run basic engineering calcs? Also clearly another technical topic. And then more on the organizational side of how do we engage folks in this effort? And then, you know, I mentioned that this is a program that we want to persist in the long term. And so persistence is one of the key things we talk about, is how do we set up the systems? How do we set up the processes to make sure that this isn't just a one-year effort? You know, this is really a multi-year engagement where we're working with you all over 2 to 3 years to get this in place and help support this program in the long term. The first year is really when the workshops are happening though, so it is a little busier in that first year. And I'll talk in another slide of like specifically how many workshops we're talking about. The second item here, coaching and technical support. So the way that I like to look at our team is we're really wanting to be more set up as an extension of your own. So it's additional resources, additional expertise. We're ultimately consultants, right? So we go around and we talk with cities and organizations about this stuff. That's what we bring to the table. You know, how to set up the processes, how to run the engineering calcs, what are good projects to prioritize. And that is, you know, a kind of additional team members that you can leverage to help meet your goals. And so the idea is that we're kind of kickstarting and helping move these things forward, and being as efficient as possible. The third one here is the treasure hunt. So on one of the previous slides, I talked about, you know, getting the energy savings, we have to do projects, right? The LED projects, the HVAC upgrades, the set point changes, you know, it could be renewables. Treasure hunts are where we actually come out to your facilities and spend time looking at, you know, maybe your building control systems, your HVAC systems, your lighting systems, to see, okay, where is the opportunity and where do we think, you know, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. So there's obviously lots of projects you could do, right? Lots of interesting things. And I think one of the challenges, especially these days, as that expands into things like, you know, you have EV chargers, part of what we want to do is, you know, what do we want to prioritize and focus on? Because you can't do everything, right? And we want to tie that into what's, you know, what's important to your city, and figure out via this treasure hunt, which is typically like a one-day event, you know, what projects do we want to focus on? And a key part of that is us, you know, like I said, we don't want to come in and just tell you what to do. we want to work with you all, help you learn how to look for this energy waste and be able to do this down the road. And then the last item here, both of the programs in different forms provide ways to manage the project. So this includes managing the project specifically. So, you know, if we have an LED project, like keeping track of that, but also tracking energy performance. And we have some good ways to go about analyzing that and providing that information to you all. So any questions so far on what the program involves? And again, on a later slide, I'll kind of talk about the timeline. Yeah, Mark, it looks like you have a raised hand.
Yes, thank you. Some of, I know my town, and I don't think we're unique. We have sort of two parts of the town. There's the town and then there's the schools. And do the services you're providing apply equally to schools as well as the town proper?
Short answer is yes. So we would probably engage them as potentially as separate entities because there's kind of different stakeholders, probably some overlap. But yeah, I think the short answer is yes. You know, in terms of enrollment, there are some eligibility requirements that we would want to talk through. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Charlie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, in getting into the treasure hunts without getting too much into the pucker brush here, if your school has solar panels, would the team come out and analyze the efficiency of the solar panels to see if they're aging or up to snuff as part of the process?
That would not typically be part of this process. It's something that we could potentially take a look at and then figure out what other resources there might be. Most of what we're looking at, what we want to prioritize, and this is a good lead into my next slide, is energy efficiency projects. That is what's incentivized via this program, but we also want to collaborate with the other offerings from the utility. So I don't know, maybe Shay or Dana, does the utility offer any resources for analyzing the solar system efficiency?
Not that you know what, let me rephrase. I am not aware of any, but would be happy to find out. My immediate thought would be, Charlie, to reach out to the company that installed them for you and see if they offer as part of a warranty or something along those lines. You know, like you have your service furnished or maintained every year, just sort of as a maintenance maybe.
It just seems that, you know, people in the best of intentions install these and don't realize that they have a decreasing graphic lifespan.
Of course. Yep.
You know,
how old are they?
Well, some are, let's see, I don't know, 8-10 years old.
Oh, you're fine.
I wish I was.
One thing I'd add, Charlie, is we'd be looking to pull data on how much those solar panels are producing.
Mm-hmm.
So we potentially could look at, you know, is the output dropping? You know, how that compares to how sunny it is out. I don't know if that's directly in our wheelhouse, but I think our engineers could at least give you a quick look, but there might be better resources.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay, so how do we save energy? And this is something I think a lot of you are familiar with, but in terms of SEM, we're mainly focusing on the low and no cost type projects first, as typically they're lower effort, they can be implemented quickly, and we can achieve savings in the short term. And there's a lot that goes into that, kind of the reason we do that, but you know, ideally we're wanting to show results right away, which is more challenging with capital projects, right? It's just they're just different timelines, and so this could be the things like turning off equipment that's not in use, optimizing set points. You know, there's some overlap here with retro commissioning, if you're familiar with those programs. And the idea is that, you know, right away, right out of the gate, we're showing those results, and we can start to make that case or expand upon the case of why energy management is important. And that doesn't mean that we're not talking about capital projects. It's just that we want to make sure that we have, from a project management perspective, that we're getting done now what we can do to save energy, and then also continuing to plan for these capital upgrades. So the things like HVAC system upgrades to HVAC systems, lighting controls, maybe new solar panels, or whatever it may be. So part of that is just making sure we have a good process in place for project management, and then we're doing as much as we can to drive that energy use down. So a pretty common question we get is, how much time does all this take? And the structure typically is a lot happens in the first year. That's when we hold most of the workshops, or when we hold the workshops, that's when we hold the treasure hunt. And that's kind of when things get, are getting all set up. Beyond that, it becomes a lot less time. It's more about maintaining the program. So how much time does it take? So in terms of workshops, between the programs, we're holding around 4 to 5 workshops in that year one. A lot of these have gone virtual at this point. We can potentially do in person if that's of interest, but we find that it's a lot easier often for folks to jump onto a virtual workshop. Those are lasting maybe 2.5 hours. We then have the treasure hunt. So often that's a full day where we're on site. Part of that is training and workforce development. How do we find energy waste? We want to be passing on our skills of like, how do we look for this? How do we look for this quote unquote treasure? And coming out of that, we want to have a list of projects, and we want to have them prioritized of like, okay, this is what we're going to focus on in the next month. Maybe we have 50 ideas on that list, but here's what we can get done in the short term. The third item here are energy team meetings. So, this might be something that you all already have in place, so we wouldn't want to necessarily tack on another meeting if we don't have to. In the beginning, we're often doing bi-weekly for 30 minutes. That way we can kind of just get things spun up, and then in the longer term, that might just be a monthly meeting, or even bi-monthly, depending on, whatever the needs are for your city. And so those are pretty predictable in terms of time commitment. The last one, the energy projects, is variable. So this is the project list coming out of the treasure hunt. And that time commitment is really, the more you put in, the more you're going to get out, right? But obviously, everyone has day jobs. They have other, the maintenance folks, the engineering folks, facilities, they have other things on their schedule. So, that will depend on what all you prioritize. But, typically the more you do, the more energy savings you're going to get, the greater reduction in greenhouse gases. Any questions on the time commitment? So I would stress that, SCM is flexible. Just like I said, we're not here to come tell you how to do everything. We're here to collaborate. The same goes with time commitments. We know things come up. There's fires to fight and people aren't available. So we aim to have a lot of flexibility around scheduling and being able to move stuff around. So, if there's busier times of the year where it's like, okay, no one can be available this month, then maybe we take a break for that month and just pick it up the following month. That happens a lot in December, as folks would probably expect. All right, I have a couple more slides before I want to kick it over to Kate. So one key tenet that is often overlooked with SCM is how it drives capital projects to build bigger pipelines and achieve larger savings. So to understand kind of the effect that SCM has on driving capital projects, and part of this is related to the processes and systems that we can put into place via strategic energy management, that it just, in the end, ultimately helps cities get more done more efficiently. So we researched this with a number of sites that had gone through SCM and found that there was roughly a 5 times increase in savings post SCM. And that might seem somewhat intuitive. I mean, that's the goal, right, of SEM, but I think having the data and having the research to show that, this actually does result in more projects being completed, more energy savings being achieved is worth highlighting. And this research, this was done with Bonneville Power Administration in the Northwest, where they've been running SEM programs for probably 15 years at this point. So they have a lot of good kind of background and data on the results. All right, so the last thing I wanted to mention is that to help cover the costs beyond the consulting services, which I mentioned are fully funded by the utility, both the utilities also provide cash incentives tied to either the energy saved or the number of projects completed. So they're slightly different between the programs, but ultimately there's some additional resources that the city would have access to based on, ultimately based on whatever projects are done. And that kind of helps cover whatever kind of costs might be related to that. Okay, so I've talked a bunch about the program details. We want to pivot and spend a few minutes hearing from someone who has been involved in a similar process and how it was valuable for their city. So we have up next Kate Stevenson. Kate leads up the Montpelier Energy Advisory Committee. She is also the co-founder and director of Home Construction and a leader in green buildings, sustainability, and professional ed. So thanks for joining, Kate, and I'll let you take it away. Just let me know when to proceed.
Great, thank you. Nice to talk to all of you in Connecticut. And I'm gonna just take a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about how we were able to use a process very similar to this SEM program that was being described for the city of Montpelier, which for those of you not familiar with Vermont, we are the capital city, but we're a town of 7,000 people. So hopefully that has some relevance to, those of you who are from small towns, as well as, maybe some of the larger cities too. So we have a volunteer energy committee, which I was the chair of. And if you want to go to the next slide, just talk a little bit about our process. So we have always been thinking big in Montpelier, and back in 2014, our city council approved a resolution that said we want to make Montpelier the first net zero city by 2030. And so since 2014, our energy committee has been slowly plugging away at this and kind of redefining, trying to define that goal. We ended up in a place where we said, well, okay, the 2030 goal is really focused on municipal buildings and operations, right? So it includes electricity at all of our municipal buildings, all of the heating and cooling, and then the fleet that is owned by the city. We also have a larger 2050 goal to be net zero for the whole community, including all the homes, businesses. So there's like a much bigger goal at 2050. But so we've kind of really been focusing more on the municipal side, and just like that 2030 date is like staring us down, right? It's getting closer and closer. So in 2021, we've been making a lot of incremental progress. We had been tracking municipal energy use. We now have 11 years of data. So we had some good data about the energy reductions that we've been making. So because our goal is specifically net zero, we're looking at both just overall energy efficiency, but also fuel switching to renewable sources. So there's, those are both feeding into our ultimate goal. So we had great baseline data, but really the question that we were asking was, what is going to get us from 2021 or 2022 by the time we finish the plan to 2030? Over those 8 years, what are the projects that are going to get us to the goal? And honestly, like, is this goal even really doable? It's aspirational, but like, what would it take to get us there over the next 8 years? So you could go to the next slide. So the consulting team that we brought in, and I'll say, like, you guys are lucky in Connecticut because we had to pay for this consulting, and you guys get it for free. We really were looking at the kind of energy profile of each department. So you can see here, this is breaking out all the different buildings, city hall, fire station, police station, the different schools, and looking at their total energy use and what percentage of that is fossil fuel versus renewable. So we were already at 43% renewable when we started this project. And it was really a question of like, okay, what will it take to switch the fuels in these big fossil fuel guzzlers? Turns out the schools. And what are we going to do about our fleet, right? There are no electric snowplows on the market yet. And most of our fleet is Department of Public Works type of equipment, heavy equipment. So what we were able to do was create what we're calling our 2030 net zero action plan. And it really helped us to prioritize. I think there's one more slide. Really prioritize the steps and which makes sense to do first. So we kind of broke it into a few tranches of like, okay, in the next 2 to 3 years, here's what we should focus on. Once we've checked those things off the list, then we can move on to a lot of the fleet stuff was pushed a little bit closer to 2030 because we just don't have as many EV options available right now on the market. And then we just looked at, okay, what are the potential capital costs? What incentive, if we want to get our high school off of oil, what are the options? Should we be looking at air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, wood chips, pellet boiler? We looked at capital costs for all of those, the ongoing operating costs, what incentives might be available, overall payback in terms of the economics of it, because that was really an important part of the plan. And use that to come up with, this 8-year timeline of what can get us to net zero by 2030. And to jump to the punchline is we have a plan to get us 88% renewable for municipal operations and buildings. And what we came out with was we realized that we're not going to be 100% renewable by 2030 just because of the limitations of the fleet, because we don't think we're going to be able to replace every single vehicle that the city owns with the non-fossil fuel option by 2030. But it has been really helpful. It is now guiding our work again, giving us those priorities, where to focus. And since then, we have been able to convince the city, with the plan in hand, we went to the city and said, well, we really need more city staff support because this has all been a volunteer effort to date. And we were able to get into this year's budget a sustainability and facilities coordinator position that just started in October. And so he's able to, now that he started, is like, able to refer to the plan and say, okay, let's figure out where to put our focus. And I thought the comment earlier about schools was an interesting one, because we have really come down to, you need to partner with the school district, which is a separate entity from the municipality, and really bring the school district on board. So we've been having a lot of meetings with the school board, the administration, and really helping them figure out their own, because we included the schools in our plan, but we also don't have a whole lot of authority over them. We don't have authority over anything because we're volunteers, but trying to help, point them in the right direction with the analysis that we were able to do in this net zero plan. So I'll stop there and pass it back over to Michael.
Great. Well, thanks, Kate, for sharing. I think you highlighted kind of one of the key things we want to accomplish with SCM is there's a lot to get done, right? Especially when you expand it out to greenhouse gas emissions. What do we do? What do we not do? What do we prioritize? What's even feasible? And that would be one of our hopes, is to work directly with the cities to to help figure that out. So does anyone have any questions for Kate? Does anyone have any questions in general?
Kate, this is Lynn. I put it in the chat, but I was hoping you could share a link to your plan and we can share that out with the webinar recording.
I will. I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Thank you so much. And congratulations. Like, not only is it amazing charting the path, but you did it with all volunteers, which is what a lot of the folks, in our sustainability teams throughout Connecticut are. So residents kind of driving the change. Thanks for that example. Charlie, we got a question. Maybe Michael, you can take the screen share down so we can see each other better.
Here.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Okay, thank you. I got to thank you for everything that's going on here. It's truly inspiring. I'm finding that in working with Sustainable CT, there's a lot of spillover into other things. We're working with the homeless and all, but I don't want to get too far off the track here. But in pretty much every situation we begin to get involved in, you have the people that say, well, that's too big a project and we can't possibly do it. But Kay, you've demonstrated that in Montpelier, it just takes somebody who says, well, yes, we can do it. And if you think we can't, what would it take to make it work? And you put a group of like-minded people together and found out what it would take to make it work. Michael, Dana, and I'm sorry, the other young lady. Thank you. You're going to affect that here in Connecticut, and I see everything that's going on as becoming a template for how communities can move forward, because we're doing it with fewer people and tighter budgets. And a lot of people are, attrition is happening, and there's going to be a lot of retirees, and we need a blueprint to get into the next generation. And you guys are helping create that, making life a little bit easier for the volunteers and the paid professionals that work at the local and state level. So I just want to say thank you on that.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Charlie. What you're saying is a big reason why I believe strongly in SEM. It's very long, it's long-term vision, and having done this for a while, like seeing how organizations pick it up and run with it, I think it often does sound like, oh, this is a lot to take on, but I think in the end, it actually ends up saving you time as you're more efficient. More people are up to speed on it. That workforce development is it's a big deal. It's a big problem, right? Like, these retirements are no joke, and we see a lot of organizations where it's like they just don't have the people, and obviously you can't go out to such low unemployment. It's hard to find people. If anyone's tried to hire anyone recently, it's pretty tough. So.
Stephanie, I see your question in the chat. You want to come on screen and share it?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I don't have a camera. Yeah, my question is this equivalent to what we're doing when we purchase, when we hire consultants to create an energy plan for us? Or is this a little bit?
Pretty similar. An energy plan is probably, I believe the output is like is a single document, right?
Yeah, so we hired a consultant, and we had to really push to get the schools included, which is absolutely ridiculous when the schools are, the largest energy guzzlers. And then we had to push for really making sure this really was a plan and not just about benchmarking, because we already do that with Portfolio Manager. So I think it's just understanding a little bit better about what this service can provide, because I think what we're trying to do next, which is basically me and whatever volunteers I can get to help me, is really taking the low-hanging fruit or the more feasible projects. And I think that's where we could really use your services, I think. So I'm starting the town hall, and just seeing, and we're approaching this in a little bit more holistic way. It's not just about energy savings, financial. It's not just about having lower impact on the environment, but also looking at how we can change our hours to bring in a little bit more work-life balance, for the employees. I'm looking to propose, but I need all the data. Closing Fridays at 12 p.m. Possibly having a couple of evenings open a little bit later so we can serve the public a little bit better. So I'm looking at this really in a holistic way, but I really need that data so I can make a really good proposal.
Yeah, we could talk further maybe after on the specifics, but I would say that an energy plan is a part of what we're looking to put together via SEM, and also broader in terms of building out like the organizational structures. So, you know, I think it goes a bit beyond like an energy plan. You know, typically we don't have a goal to create like a single document, but more of like a living document and living processes to help move it forward. But documentation is a big part of it. So, and that project management is a big aspect. So I can at least speak to that component that I would say it includes an energy plan, but it's more.
Okay, so could this be then maybe helping us actually take some steps to implementation of the plan? So
100%.
Those of us who have plans already, like we have a roadmap, great, it's a document, fantastic. Well, the document's only a document until we start doing something with it. And so would you then say, okay, let's look at some specifics from this plan and see how we can get there?
Definitely. Yeah, just yesterday we were working with, this is a university, but they have like a 600-page plan that was created 6 years ago, but nothing's been done except for like an LED lighting project. And so it's all outlined. It's all, you know, for each school, they have a different, you know, process in place, but it's not been implemented. So we will take that first because we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? And I imagine that was pretty expensive to get that put together. Like we want to leverage what's been done.
Thank you.
Yep. Catherine?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I'm in West Hartford. So first for Michael, is SEM, are you envisioning that more as a sequential building by building process? Or, you know, in West Hartford, we have lots of buildings. So sometimes it's easier to do it on a portfolio basis and you have economies of scales with different types of projects, which then you might be able to implement. And there's no timeline involved. You know, if you do each building sequentially, we'll never get through everything.
Right. I'd say it's a bit of both. We want to prioritize where we're going to get the biggest kind of bang for our buck first, but we want to be looking at all of your buildings holistically. So, but I mean, there's a limit to that. So if you have 500 buildings, we'll just say 500 buildings, right? Like we can't do all that at once. So we'll start to focus on the main buildings first. So I wouldn't say it's sequential. It's more like we'll work our way down to like the smaller buildings, I would assume, or wherever the smaller savings is. And so one thing that I know we're getting close to time, but you know, for cities, there's the buildings, but there's also wastewater. Wastewater often has huge opportunities for energy savings. And so that would be something, you know, in addition to like the typical commercial type buildings, we'd want to discuss it as well. So there's a whole prioritization exercise that's part of this that we would want to talk through and figure out, okay, what do we want to focus on? You know, what's important to the city, but also like from our viewpoint, where are you going to get the most reduction in greenhouse gases?
Gotcha. We're lucky in West Hartford, we don't deal with wastewater. Kate, I had one question for you. I saw your report focuses specific on energy, not on greenhouse gas inventory. And that's what we've done to date also in West Hartford. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that. We debate daily whether we should, you know, just convert or try and broaden it a little bit to emissions versus our focus solely on energy units.
Yeah, we have been tracking greenhouse gas emissions alongside. So the big spreadsheet, you know, it tracks in gallons, it puts it to MMBTUs or, you know, common units. Then it goes into conversion tables for all the greenhouse gas emissions for all the various fuels. So yes, we are doing that, but it hasn't been our focus because, and it gets back to, you know, the original city council resolution was about conversion to renewable energy, not carbon emissions reduction, not greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So whether that, you know, was a good choice or not, that's the goal that we're pointing towards.
And it sounds like you did it then from the bottom up approach to not using any generic greenhouse gas inventory model, but building the energy model and then converting, which is kind of what a lot of communities in Connecticut have done as well today.
I've been looking for, you know, there must be a software platform out there that makes this easier, but so far, you know, it is our crazy spreadsheet that we've been building for 11 years. And part of what the consulting team that we worked with did help us to kind of streamline that and organize it better and hopefully keep that Excel spreadsheet from breaking for the next 10 years. But yeah, I have not yet found a great tool, because portfolio manager is great, but it only works for buildings, doesn't talk about fleet, it doesn't measure all these other things like wastewater emissions and stuff, which is a big part. So yeah, so we have not been, we're tracking greenhouse gas emissions kind of on the side and have those numbers, but really focusing on like how to, you know, gallons of fuel oil avoided, diesel and unleaded. Yeah.
All right, so we've hit 1 o'clock here, and I know some people have had to jump. Let me just thank everyone, especially Michael for sharing, and Dana and Shay and Kate, thanks so much. And we will send out the recording and the slides and the link to Montpelier's plan and continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.